All right, so tonight, through a somewhat strange synchronicity, we have Stephen Gray here. We're talking about his new book, Cannabis and Spirituality. So get this, Darren's friend was giving his wife this book, and 3 days later, the book showed up.
Giving both of
you guys the book, and then 3 days later, the book showed up unannounced from the publisher. So it's pretty interesting there. And its subtitle is An Explorer's Guide to an Ancient Plant Spirit Ally. So, yeah, it should be interesting. Thanks for coming on the show, Stephen.
No problem. Glad to.
So, I guess the book is basically about aligning cannabis use with your spirituality. What was your driving force in putting this book together?
Well, let's see. How long of an answer do you want?
Might as well do the long version, yeah.
Where do we start? Okay, I'm going way back, but I'll keep that part brief. The way back part is that I've been interested in psychedelics since I was about 18. So we're talking, 45 years or so now, or more. And I encountered at that time some information connecting the use of psychedelics to spirituality. And although cannabis wasn't so much a part of that, it was in a general sense, but not in a specifically talked about way. LSD was the big one in those days, of course, and a few others, but mostly LSD. But I've always liked the cannabis plant. It taught me a few things when I was pretty young. It taught me how to dance, taught me how to listen to music, and a few other really, I was quite shy when I was a teenager, and I could go on about this one, but I'll just tell you really briefly. I was at a little yacht club in a rural part of Nova Scotia up in Canada, and my friends and I were at the yacht club bar, and there was some kind of Celtic group playing, and we'd had a couple of puffs, and they knew me as this kind of shy, not very physically expressive kind of guy. And we'd had a couple of puffs, and I just got the bug to get up and start doing a sort of pseudo, two-step or whatever they do, and having a great time doing it. I came back to the table, and my friends all went, "What the hell was that? I've never seen you do anything like that before." So I always feel like I've had an affinity for the plant, and skipping, 40 years or so, excuse me. And along the way, without going into detail, I'll say that it hasn't always been 100% positive in my life. It's never been a major problem, but I think it actually triggered a degree of bipolarity in my early 20s at one point. But that's another story. You can ask about it if you want, but we're getting away from the main theme here, of course.
Cannabis did?
Yeah, I think so. So that's one of the things that I would talk about, whether you ask about it or not, is that, and I talk about this in the book, in my chapters, that I like to think of cannabis as in the same way that other entheogens are sometimes described, as a non-specific amplifier, or sometimes it's called an unspecific amplifier, which means it has a hell of a lot to do with how you channel the energy. For the major entheogens, they talk about set and setting a lot, and I address that in the book as well. Yeah. When I was in my early 20s, I was using the plant quite a lot. And not with no attention to setting or ritual or any notion of it being a spiritual ally. And I think it triggered, because I hadn't had issues with bipolarity before that. It happened during that sort of year or two where I would swing back and forth from depression to more or less elation. It only lasted a couple of years, but then so did that level of cannabis use.
Do you think it had anything to do with the legality of it and sort of having to straddle that line between doing what you're doing, but having some, not necessarily shame, but the stigma around drugs?
No, I don't. For one thing, I'm in Canada, and I'm being a little bit glib there. But the situation in the States in those days, and probably still, was very different from Canada. The police, I'm not trying to put down your fine country, but the police have always been more aggressive in the United States, as far as I can tell, and much gentler in Canada. So yes, it was illegal, but I wasn't really thinking about that. I wasn't worried about it. No, I just think it triggered a latent kind of, degree of, up and downness that was there. It didn't last. I mean, it didn't become habitual. I never got onto any kind of, pharmaceutical medications or anything like that. It just was like that for a couple of years, where I'd swing for 2 or 3 weeks. Well, to put it in more spiritual terms, excuse me, that whole idea of swinging back and forth like that, I see as, how would I put this? I've been very interested in Buddhism. I used to study, practice, and sometimes teach Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and I really like the way Buddhist teachings explain ego and the basic conundrum that we face as human beings. So the way they talk about ego is that the more we're embedded in an ego way of relating to the world, not egotistical necessarily, just caught in what Buddhist teachings would call the illusion of the separate self. One's self-esteem and one's relationship to how you're doing in the world is very conditional. So, if you thought things were going well, you'd get, you could be up about it and on top of your game, etc. If you felt like things weren't going well, or you started judging yourself, then you could, fall into a negative state of mind about all that. So the ego is always based on conditions that are external to oneself that way, of course, based on this narrative that you create in your head. Mm-hmm. And so, as coming back to this idea that cannabis is a non-specific amplifier, it exaggerates whatever your state of mind is, potentially. I like to say that whatever road you're facing down, it can take you farther down that road. And both its potential and its problem. Because, as you guys probably know, a lot of people are not using cannabis wisely. It's not a benefit in their lives. It can be an escape for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you channel it, this is where a lot of the focus of the book is, I think, is that if you channel that energy, that enhanced or amplified energy, into being fully present, opening your heart, opening your body, or relaxing, meditating, doing yoga, other spiritual type practices, or just simply being very present in the space, then that's the way in which it's a spiritual ally, in my view, because it deepens or amplifies those intentions and those states of mind.
Do you think we'll ever get to the place where we can have sort of almost like pharmacies where people can go in and talk to someone and get, because it's almost like different strains and these different things can sort of help if someone was feeling depressed. There might be something that helps more than someone that's just looking to jump right into the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, we better, no, seriously, that's the way to go. I could go on about this a lot. One way of approaching this is to think about the fact that in the course of human history, there have been numerous cultures, and I guess you could say subcultures within cultures, that have been have had a stunning knowledge of pharmacopoeia, of the plant-based medicines of the planet, and how they combine as well. I'm just reading a book right now that talks about Chinese medicine in the pre-Christian era. And there was a period in there for at least several hundred years. It kind of waxed and waned, but there was a period where the shamans and the medical people had an immense knowledge of plant medicines and how they combined. They mixed concoctions and things like that. And the ancient Greeks were like that too. There's a book I read where the fellow talks about how when the ancient Greeks talked about wine, they were talking about taking a thimbleful of wine, of what they called wine. So that would not be, your basic $15 bottle of wine we're talking about here. They infused quite a number of plants, probably including cannabis, datura, and a whole bunch of other things into their wines. People have known around this planet a great deal about plant medicines. So we've been in a nadir, I guess you could say, about all that in modern times, especially in the West, but yes, more or less around the planet as well. And a lot of that knowledge has been lost. I mean, you could walk into a pharmacy 100 years ago in the United States or Canada, and I would hope that the pharmacist would have known a lot about those cannabis substances. They had all kinds of variations of them, tinctures and oils and topicals and salves and all these things. It wasn't until the 1930s in the United States that cannabis was outlawed. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, it was very common and accepted and not stigmatized at all, although they didn't know about its spiritual use particularly, unless they happened to read Fitzhugh Ludlow or somebody like that. I don't know. Do you know who Fitzhugh Ludlow is?
Sounds familiar. Remind me.
I forgot the name of the book he wrote, but he was a very young guy. He was sort of a prodigy in that sense, a little bit like Rimbaud, who also, I believe, was a cannabis devotee in his youth. But Fitzhugh Ludlow was an American, and he was writing sometime in the 1860s or 70s. I'm not quite sure. He wrote this book. He was using hashish, I believe, and I think he was taking it orally, and he was having these really remarkable experiences, and he was very articulate about how he wrote about them. His book is well known in certain circles. I've never read the book. I've just read different aspects of his ideas and so on in different places. So the point of what you're asking, your question about, will we ever get to that point where you walk into a pharmacy and they know what they're talking about? They better. And in Vancouver is a kind of a unique situation. We have legal medical marijuana at the federal level in Canada, although I think there are only maybe 30,000 or so registered medical users. And we're heading toward full legalization sometime within about a year or so for the whole country. But Vancouver is unique in the sense that we started. There was a compassion club about 20 years ago that the police decided to leave alone, and had a lot of success with people with very serious illnesses, HIV, cancer, etc. And they just decided to leave them alone, and they behaved themselves, and that gradually spread to the point where we now have, it's actually been cut back a little because the city has regulated them in the last year or so. But even with that regulation, there are probably about 100 dispensaries in Vancouver, and they're not legal at the federal level, and we don't have the same kind of state legislation scenarios that you guys have in the States. But the local police just leave them alone. And depending on which one you go to, I'm a member of about 3, and I go to 2 in particular. And in both those places, they know their medicines. They know a lot about the different strains and the different cannabinoids that you can have in them, like CBD, probably knows getting a lot of attention these days.
We're actually just in Calgary.
Yeah, but
Calgary.
Most of our listeners are in the States. So.
Yeah, most of our listeners are in the States. I'm actually a card carrier too.
Ah, right on. Excellent. Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir.
Card carrying member.
Are you too, Michael, a card carrying member? Or?
I am.
My wife, who loves your book, is also a card carrier.
Oh, well, you guys are ahead of me. I'm just a gray area card carrier.
And I haven't touched it in 9 years, coming up on 9 years, so I'm the opposite on the opposite spectrum.
We don't have that kind of freedom here, though, yet. Like, I've got to order from very specific people online unless I want to go through street connections.
Yeah, they're struggling to keep up here.
You mean with production?
No,
yeah.
They don't have production in Alberta.
All you can do is go through your online, and like the Alberta one's like out. They've got 2 different kinds right now, and neither of them are they're great if you want high CBD, but they've got really nothing without. All the THC is just being ripped. As soon as one comes on, if you're not on it within like a couple of hours, it's gone.
Wow.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, we're really spoiled in Vancouver that way. I go to a dispensary here that they have a wide array of medicines, and they have 4 or 5 staff in there that are all very knowledgeable. They can tell you, you come in and say, kind of what you want it for. They'll bring out 3 or 4 and they'll say, okay, this one is, like 60-40 sativa indica or 70-30. And, but it's not an edgy sativa, or this one's an indica, but it's not a really soporific. It's not going to knock you out, it's a lighter indica, that kind of thing. There's the whole CBD thing I'm fascinated by now, because there's now California is actually way ahead of us on this one. Because they've been developing CBD-rich strains in various combinations for several years now. But it's coming fairly quickly into British Columbia, in the Vancouver area at least. And, so you can go into a dispensary now and you can get a straight CBD in a capsule or a tincture. You can get a 2-to-1 THC to CBD. You can get a 1-to-1. Or you can, kind of mix and match with different ones to get the ratio you want.
It's totally designer now. It's mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah.
It's not like that here.
No, I'm not surprised.
But maybe it'll come along. I don't know. Alberta needs its own growers here, is the problem. And I guess it's a 12 million startup. Like, you have to invest that to get the facility built the right way.
You mean to be a federal licensed producer?
Yeah, to jump through. I was talking to someone. They were looking into doing it here. Sorry about that.
Well, hopefully that'll change. I think they're going to open that up a lot when they put the legal framework in, which probably won't happen until spring 2018 unless they are, laying it further. Yeah.
So this is CBD that won't actually get you high, right? Like, there's still healing properties in the CBD without the THC?
Absolutely, yeah. Although CBD may have a mild psychoactive effect for some people. In fact, it does have a mild psychoactive effect for some people, but it's pretty mild, I think. That's anecdotal evidence from people I heard about.
It's mild. Try the different strains. Yeah, order different things. Pick up different things, and the one that's high CBD, you don't really get heady high. You don't get.
Yeah, I've heard women say they get more body off of it. They do. They feel something in their body, especially when they're like.
Just makes you feel.
When we were in the States, the chick that was there was like, "Yeah, these like CBD cookies when you're on your period are just like
perfect.
Amazing."
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, so a lot of people say that CBD rich or CBD only strains can be calming and can be good for various types of aches and pains and so on. However, for your listeners' benefit, if they're not familiar with this whole sort of area of discussion, the latest information I'm getting from some pretty knowledgeable people, for example, Martin A. Lee, who's the author of Smoke Signals from California, and he's the founder and co-founder and director of Project CBD down there. And he's been up to Vancouver for our Spirit Plant Medicine Conference and another cannabis conference. And he says that the strains that are leaning somewhat more toward CBD but still have THC in them are particularly effective, that CBD and THC work synergistically together. So another fellow, I'm still on the same theme, although it may sound like I'm wandering here. Another guy who was at a cannabis conference up here in the summer called the Cannabis Hemp Conference, Clark Whitfield. I think he's from Georgia or Alabama. He's an MD, and he's been prescribing cannabis for helping people get off antidepressants and other reasons, but that's his main focus. And the way he talks about it, he says if they're what they're now calling cannabis naive is the new term I'm hearing. Meaning, it's a little bit of a weird term because naive almost is like a willful innocence, right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying cannabis innocent or cannabis unexperienced, they're saying cannabis naive now. So if he gets a patient coming in who's cannabis naive, he'll start them on a purely CBD strain. But then he'll gradually start introducing strains that have a little bit more THC in them because of this synergistic benefit from combining the two. And Martin A. Lee supports that view as well, that if you can get up to, a lot of people are working with 1-to-1 now, actually, 1-to-1 CBD and THC. And again, for your listeners, or maybe even for yourself, if you're not aware of it, THC and CBD are the two most prevalent cannabinoids out of over 100 in the plant. And they trade off. There's only room for, 100% or X amount of the two of them combined. So the more THC, the less room there is for CBD and vice versa. So a lot of people are now working with 1-to-1. In fact, the co-owner of this dispensary that I'm referring to, she has an interesting story. She's 50 years old. She was not a cannabis user until 2 years ago, and she was having pretty severe menstrual issues, like wild fluctuations in, hot and cold and hormonal imbalance, and it was very uncomfortable for her, and someone suggested using cannabis. So she started on a 1-to-1 THC to CBD at a very low dosage. I think it was 5 milligram capsules, so 2.5 milligrams of THC and 2.5 of CBD, I think maybe twice a day. And she worked her way up to 10, so 5 and 5. And that's what she does now. I think she does 10 milligrams twice a day. She said there's no psychoactive effect. She does this and goes to work and works all day and doesn't notice anything other than the fact that she feels a hell of a lot better than she would if she were not doing it.
Yep.
You just get used to it.
Yeah, you got to. That's an important thing. You got to kind of work your way up. There is a tolerance factor or a familiarity factor.
So you yourself, do you microdose? And do you mind I ask what your preferred way of?
Yeah, you can ask anything about my cannabis use.
Like, do you like the oils primarily? Are you like a connoisseur, or do you vape most or vaporize most?
Yeah, I mostly vaporize. I'm toying with. One of the reasons I mostly vaporize is because I don't like to take huge amounts of time. I'm not one of these people that wants to be going around under the influence of the plant much of the time. Some people are and do, and that's effective for them. And as I mentioned at the beginning, there are other people who for whom that is not an effective way to live their lives. For me, I like to take an evening, a couple times a week maybe, and use it in a, without being too sort of pretentious about it, like a more or less spiritual way, where I'll actually hit a little gong 3 times and make it into a kind of a mini ritual, and I'll have a couple of puffs on the vaporizer, and I'll often meditate, just doing a simple follow the breath meditation, sometimes for 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes for pretty much the whole time I'm with it. Other times I'll, jot down some notes, or I play guitar, play my guitar, or listen to music a little, that kind of thing. Excuse me. But I like the immediacy of that, and that it's sort of all over and I can go to bed at midnight and get a decent night's sleep sort of idea. As you know, oral ingestion takes up to 2 hours, actually, in some cases, to come on to full effects, and then lasts another 3 or 4 before it starts to, leave the system, basically. So, no, I rarely take it orally, actually, although people keep giving me things. As I say, there's a lot of product very readily available in Vancouver, and I've got like 4 or 5 different bottles of tinctures. I've got a sativa, a hybrid, an indica, things like that. Somebody gave me some chocolates recently, that sort of thing. So is that a partial answer to your question?
And then you're also into, well, I've only watched a couple of your other interviews, and I see that you're also into mushrooms, peyote, ayahuasca, but not alcohol.
Oh, I like wine, but I don't.
Okay, well, wine's kind of different. Yeah.
Alcohol's an interesting one. I used to like it when I was younger. Starting at about 14, actually, and I liked it. I mentioned I was kind of shy and inhibited when I was a teenager. Alcohol loosens you up, obviously, and I used to love dancing all through my 20s and early 30s, and I found that if I went to a club and had a couple of drinks, I loosened up more, and I liked it for that. I liked alcohol if I was active. But the older I got, the less interesting I found alcohol, and now as a high, it's really not interesting at all. If you have one drink and just pay attention to it, it gives you a buzz for half an hour, 45 minutes, and I don't even find it a particularly interesting buzz. Yeah. My wife likes drinking wine with dinner, so we have a glass of wine with dinner. If we have friends over for dinner, I'll sometimes have 2 glasses of wine, but I don't actually even notice any effect from it, really, and I don't need that disinhibiting effect anymore, so I'm not really drawn to it much, to be honest.
I agree with you that the two don't really go that well together, and for me, I haven't been a drinker for a long time like you. I mean, in high school a little bit or whatever, but when you smoke, it just makes you sick after you drink. So the two don't really mix, and I wonder how much the alcohol producers have been in keeping this slow, holding back the whole marijuana thing, because the more people that smoke, then it's a natural thing that I think you drink less,
Yeah. One of the contributors to the book, Mariano da Silva, the Brazilian ayahuasca shaman, said the 20th century was the century of alcohol, and the 21st century is going to be the century of cannabis. And you see in cultures
and other psychoactives.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm thinking in this regard, in particular, even as a sort of a social substance, Mm-hmm. In Colorado, for example, where we've now had, 4.5 years, or 4 years or so of this legal regime at the state level. I have friends who live in Colorado, and they say that they're starting to go to cocktail parties where there's no alcohol, and people are serving little drinks with some cannabis in them.
Exactly my point.
Yeah. So I'm not focused on that kind of use in the book, of course. None of the contributors are, but in terms of a cultural shift, I think that could be a beneficial cultural shift. Again, depending on how people use it, anything can be misused. Anything can be used wisely. Almost anything. Maybe even a gun.
And I appreciate your advice to use it spiritually with reverence and with set and setting. I mean, I really wish I would have had that awareness when I was younger, when I was playing around with it. I mean, I went through periods of, chronic use, and then kind of got into other stuff. Not that it's a gateway drug at all, but I mean, I had my struggles with alcohol and harder drugs as well. But I guess that's part of what I was trying to say, is that it still can be an addiction. So I appreciate your caution of that, and to try and have some spirituality around it.
If you don't mind, my favorite way of utilizing it currently is to go to yoga, a yoga class, and sit for as long 15 minutes prior and just do like anapana and bring myself into where I am and meditate, and then continue the anapana through the whole class, but then really try and do metta at the end. And I think if you're using the cannabis and then doing the yoga and the focus and activating yourself and trying to stay present in like almost Vipassana is difficult. I've sat Vipassana. That's my tradition that I've gotten into. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but
yeah, so it's very similar to the Buddhist basic meditation that I used to do.
And I think that's really important for people to be doing that and all doing that together right now. And it would make a real strong force of meta energy. I know. And then I think I can't wait to read your book, but I think I'm going to hear quite a bit of that in this.
Absolutely, yeah. And there, at the beginning of what you were saying there, you talked about the cautions, so to speak, or the being cautious, so to speak. And a number of the contributors address that. Kathleen Harrison, chapter 1, her chapter is called "Who Is She?" And it's a wonderful piece of writing. I've read it. I've read that whole chapter like 8 or 9 times now, and every single time I read it, I get more out of it. She's a brilliant person, and she's a beautiful writer. And one of the sections in there, she doesn't go on about it for too long, but she talks about how she knows young men in particular who, the way she talks about it is they create this kind of what they consider a safe space for themselves with heavy cannabis use, and they don't want to come out of it back into what she called the daylight world, of responsibilities and so on. And she used the term wedded. They become wedded to it, and she meant that metaphor almost quite literally, because she's observed that people become more wedded to the plant than they are to their partners. They're the people that are supposedly close to them in their lives.
She's a jealous one, Mary Jane.
She's very seductive, but that's a little bit anthropomorphizing her, because she doesn't do that. It's we who do that to ourselves. She's
of course.
Yeah, she's such a, if she's working well for you at any particular moment, it can be such a beautiful space to enter, enhanced in multiple ways. And it's only stands to reason that who wouldn't want to go back to such a space, and that therein lies the rub, as it were. That becomes tricky for people. They want to go back and be in that space, but I wouldn't take this 100% exactly literally the way I'm saying it. But the way I think of it is, the more you do that, the less she offers. She's a tricky gal in that way, and then in terms of spiritual use. Again, not to draw too tight a line around it, because people use it in different ways. And some people, it depends on how you define spiritual or spirituality. It can be a pretty wide open definition. If you're just calmer and more open-hearted, then that's spiritual. And some people, I think, benefit from cannabis by using it daily, kind of a light high, as it were, and it just kind of settles them down a little. And I don't think that's problematic for some people, particularly more mature people who are actively engaged in life. Yeah, I know people that are like, I know a university professor in the United States. He's the head of the religion department at his university, and he stays a little bit high through the day. He teaches in that state. And I said, why? And he said, it just focuses him in a little more. He connects to the students a little better. So that's all good, in my view. However, as a number of the contributors point out in the book, for what you might call deeper spiritual work, it's probably better to take the cannabis less frequently, because of that tolerance/familiarity effect. Mariano da Silva says that the way he uses the plant is on the weekend. Basically, he'll either meditate with it, or he lives in the Brazilian forest, and he said he'll go for a walk in the forest, and he has what he calls special meditations that he does. And he said he tries to leave like sort of 5 to 7 days between times. And he said, when you use it with that kind of intention and that kind of skill, it can have and this is his phrase, a transcendental effect.
I believe that.
Yeah. And he said, but if I do it every day, I lose that effect altogether.
Yeah,
definitely.
I can totally see that. So when you talk about a non-specific amplifier and exaggerating a state of mind, is that when you're using it in balance that it happens to you all the time, or is that a specific state that happens when you're high?
I didn't really understand that question.
So like it being a non-specific amplifier, right?
Yeah.
Is that happening to you all the time if you're using it in balance, or does that happen? Like, does the modifying happen just being when you're high?
That's an excellent question. And Joan Bellow addresses that in the book. She's quite brilliant too. She has a book called The Benefits of Marijuana. Excuse me. And the way Joan talks about it is that it's not so much in the high of the moment that cannabis is spiritually beneficial. It's in gradually shifting your sort of locus of attention or the way that you live your life. Because in the moment, again, when it's channeled effectively, it can help you open up, relax, be more present, have deeper insights. It can open up the heart. All very spiritual kind of qualities, you could say, right? But that leaves when the high is over. But when you have those kind of experiences, you start to realize, ideally anyway, I don't know how easily this happens for any given individual, but you start to realize that you can live that way. You can't do it by having cannabis all the time, I don't think, for the reasons we just talked about. Yeah. It's a kind of a reconfiguration of how we move through the world. The way I talk in my chapter, the way I think I talked about it in the book was that we're learning to trust the immediate experience of being in the now without the overlay of what, again, Buddhist teachings would call a secondhand guesswork of the story-creating ego that says, this is true, this is not true, this is real, this is not real, this is good, this is bad, I must do this and I must not do this, etc., etc. It's starting to trust our whole body experience in this exact moment. And cannabis isn't required to do that, of course, but because of the amplifying effect, it can deepen that with some discipline, okay?
Do you talked earlier about your bowel and your breathing? Is that like, do you mind getting a little deeper? And like, do you have a little ritual that you use as you really start to, take that first toke and embrace the high?
Yeah, I kind of come and go with it. I'm looser sometimes than others, and sometimes my intentions are a little different for the way that I use it in any given session. But I have a small, like, sort of 3-inch across Tibetan bell gong and a little, stick to hit it with. And the typical Tibetan meditation practices would start with 3 hits on something like that, and then I'll speak to. I'll be honest. I don't know for a fact that there's a spirit of the cannabis plant, and we can talk about that. Other people say they have experienced that.
I've seen her.
Oh, good for you. Okay, so that's one more bit of evidence there. I just assume that there's something or somebody or something, like that, and I kind of go on that basis in terms of treating it with respect. And I'll speak to it. I'll maybe make a little prayer. I'll thank it. Kathleen Harrison is sweet about that in her chapter. She talks about preparing your space as you would for an honored guest. Preparing your special pipe and welcoming this plant in as a guest in your home, so to speak. I do a little of that, and then I have a very active mind in general, and naturally a kind of busy mind that I have to work with. So it's challenging. I often have to work fairly hard in a sense to stay present, stay out of thought, as it were. But I do that as much as I can. Sometimes, as I said, for the whole evening, sometimes it'll come and go. Like what I've started to notice in the last year or two more. That's another thing about, not to get sidetracked from what I want to say, but that's another thing about this plant is that there's a lot of learning involved in how to really, effectively work with this plant, and it keeps shifting. In my life, it does anyway. And lately, I've started to notice that. In the same way that I don't know which one of you, I haven't really quite figured out whose voice belongs to who with you three guys, but the one of you that was talking about Vipassana.
Yeah. Michael.
That's Michael with the high voice, and I'm the one with a bit of a lisp, and Darren's the deep, slow voice.
I'm the sultry voice.
I'll work on that.
Too much atrazine where I grew up.
So the way I understand Vipassana, it's not that different from the shamatha practice that I learned, following the breath and so on like that. Yeah. And so what I've started to notice with the cannabis is that I'll go off into a kind of like a thought box or picture of some kind, a scene, and I'll live in there for a while, and then at a certain point it'll feel like it has a completion, and I'll just drop it and come back to the breath and come back to being present. It can be anything. It can be an idea for something I'm writing. It can be sometimes I rehearse conversations that I want to have with people that are sort of more challenging or more interesting, things that need to be expressed clearly, and I'll sometimes rehearse the kind of things that I want to say when I'm going to be getting together with that person later, just to kind of, get clear with myself that way. And the cannabis seems to really help with that, in my view. It seems to clarify thought that way.
I agree.
And then I'll come back and go, oh yeah, that one's over for now. Maybe that took 5 minutes or so. I don't know. And then I come back and sit with it for a while again, and then something else will come up later. I often try not to go. Some creative people, and that's addressed a little bit in the book, Cannabis as a creative ally, or an ally for creative work. Some people can work in the embrace of the plant, in an extended way, like writers and so on. Some writers I know can do that. In fact, the guy Floyd Salas, who writes has a chapter in the book. That's the way he writes. He writes high. Personally, I don't. That doesn't really work too well for me.
Is it good?
Say what?
What he writes, is it good?
Good question. I haven't read anything else he's written, to be honest. He does have 2 poems in the book that are quite lovely. And I like the way he wrote in the book. His chapter I like. He's won a number of awards for his novels. He's a successful writer from California. I've never heard of him before, but yeah, he in his bio he listed several fairly major awards. Nothing at the level of a Pulitzer Prize, but
so it works for him. I have some of my best ideas come in the first 15-20 minutes after smoking.
Absolutely, yeah. That's when it's freshest, isn't it? Yeah. So for myself, it doesn't usually work. I tend to get bogged down, and I know other writers that are. Martin Ball is similar. He doesn't write high, and he loves the plant. He uses it a lot, but he doesn't write high because he tends to get bogged down in all the different options and possibilities and stuff like that. Some brain functions don't work as well under the influence of cannabis, I would say.
Left brain doesn't work so good. But right brain, it's all right brain for me.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So linear, there's another mention in the book. I think it's in my chapter on cannabis and creativity. I quoted a fellow who's using a pseudonym of Herb Garden, he calls himself. Yeah. And he says that he's I got this off of Lester Grinspoon's website that he had collected testimonials by people who use cannabis in effective ways. And this fellow says he's a composer who has written for a number of major orchestras in the United States. And he has a list that I put in the book of the things that work well with cannabis and the things that don't, and they do tend to break down on the left brain, right brain kind of dichotomy. For example, he says that improvisations of less than 2 minutes work fairly well, but not longer. And as I say, I play music, and I've noticed that. It's really interesting. I wrote about it a little bit in that chapter. I think in my chapter about that. I kind of sometimes think that with cannabis and doing something like playing guitar or whatever, probably depends on your level of chops. Like my chops aren't 100% fluid, in terms of improvising. I don't play enough. For somebody who their technique is a non-issue, like a world-class master of their instrument, it might be different. I'm not really sure about that.
It might get you into the flow state.
Yeah, I found it easier to create music, but then it's just the next time you go to play it, it's gone. Yeah. Like I found, like you almost need to have a recorder if you're doing it seriously, because it's like, the same things happen even when you're not smoking. If you're writing music, like if that's why my rule is if you make something you really like, I'll just sit there and play it over and over like 20 times in a row. And then sometimes it just falls into the ether. Yeah,
we used to play hockey on it quite a bit. Like I got into a habit where I'd play like Slightly Baked and I mean, you'd start the game off and you'd make some amazing plays, and the next thing you know, you're just getting high for every game. But I mean, it was definitely performance enhancing in a lot of ways. Like we it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of people are using it for that now.
Really?
So
yeah, long distance runners.
So Ross Rebliati did game the system after.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. Well, that's what I was saying back then.
Snowboarder,
yeah,
right?
And I was saying that back then. I mean, because we used to just play sports on it all the time, and I mean, you get into that flow state a little simpler. Like if you're good enough at your sport where it comes automatically, I think that helps. Yeah,
I was trying to allude to that in what I was writing.
Yeah.
In that section of the book, that if you know if you've got your technique down really well in whatever it is you're doing, the cannabis is more likely to be an assistant in that regard because you don't have to tap back into that other side of the brain particularly. So the way that I think I mentioned this in the book is that I sometimes feel like you're either on the bus or you're off the bus scenario. If I'm not really connecting well with that flow, my playing will generally be worse than if I was straight. But then, as one of you mentioned there a moment ago, you get into that flow, and then sometimes it just takes you to places where you just go, wow. And that's not just the illusion of the extra shine that the plant puts on it. It really is like that. My buddy Adrian and I mentioned this briefly in the book, actually scratch that last. I've used a pseudonym for him in the book. Aiden. I didn't have his permission to use his name in the book. I didn't ask him, actually.
Emery Hole 4750.
Yeah, there we go. So Aiden and I get together on the weekends, and I was saying that I usually use cannabis about twice a week, and it's typically one of those. If Aiden is coming over, one of those is just me alone in the way that I described. But
is that the pseudonym now?
Whatever.
That is the pseudonym.
Okay, yes. So I don't have to bleep the Aidens. Okay.
Aiden is the pseudonym. Anyway. He's a lover of the cannabis plant, and we like to play music under the influence. And we actually make that into a ritual too. We use the gong for that, and we state prayers. We make little dedications. We bring in people that we want to send positive feelings or thoughts to, and we sit for 3, 4, 5 minutes before we have a couple of puffs. And then we sit for another 5 to 10 minutes after we have a couple of puffs. Then we play music for a while and often have a top up about an hour later and go through that ritual again. But what I noticed in those circumstances with him is that sometimes it takes me a while to get into that flow. But when I do, it gets really interesting sometimes. And we've had moments together that I'm pretty sure we never would have come close to without the influence of the cannabis plant. There was one, we tend to pick quite simple songs because, our chops are somewhat limited and we don't want to have to be thinking about a lot of chord changes. So we tend to pick songs that have 3 or 4 chords and are fairly repetitive that way so we can stretch out both vocally and on the guitars. And we've had moments where there was this one song where we started improvising vocally together, just free form, like there was no plan to it, just over this 4-chord song. And we got into falsetto range. And there was a moment where I just felt, just for like a second or two, I just felt this presence there. It felt kind of like a white light, almost like a white angelic presence up above me and to the side. And it didn't last long. And then we continued to do that for another couple of minutes. And I didn't stop because I didn't want to interrupt what we were doing. But when we stopped, I mentioned it to Aidan, and he said, I was able to describe about what we were doing and where we were in the song at that point. And he said, yes, at that exact moment, I had that exact same experience. It's like a meta event happened that transcended anything individual between us,
The guardian lions.
Whatever.
Yeah, the lions, they like the music when you play.
Yeah. Actually, I just... in terms of that little anecdote and the fact that we were singing really high in falsetto, I was really interested. I came upon something just the other day from an indigenous spiritual person saying that the spirits like high notes. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting, like high singing or whatever. High pitches.
Oh, that's good. That's way higher than I can go.
Yeah. Is that your Yoko Ono impression?
Yeah.
I'm more the baritone.
No, I think she chased away a few spirits, actually. Well, yeah, it's interesting that the Native Americans and Canadians often sing really high in those powwow songs. Wow, they're way up there. Yeah. Anyway, that's that.
Cool.
So what about this? Go ahead, Darren.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
What about, you've got, there's a couple chapters in the book on growing and the different sort of techniques you can use when you're growing to help your plants along spiritually?
Yeah, I think there's only one chapter in there on that, and it's from a fellow, another anonymous one who is over in Europe and in a place where it's not legal, and he's been doing it for a long time under those circumstances. So he just uses the handle LLP, which I never say what that is in the book, but he actually says it means love, light, power.
Nice.
And I think he also has another pseudonym, which I didn't bother using. It was just Keith Sunshine, something like that. Anyway, it's just the one chapter, and it's quite simple. It's not a lot of technique specifically. It's not an instructional chapter. It's more of an inspirational chapter. It's very simple. He's not really a writer. He's just a very kind of humble, very reverent guy who's always taken a sacred, what he would call a sacred attitude toward his plants. And he said the first thing is you got to love them. They respond to that, and have an intention what you want to do with them, and then go from there and just really look after them well. Give them all they need, give them the right kind of nutrients, give them the right kind of light. He does talk a little bit about technique with some things like water. He's big on water. He thinks, it makes a difference if you give them really good quality water. Not necessarily, you can use tap water, but if you can give them balanced alkaline, acidic, or
natural
even
spring water.
Natural spring water, whatever, some really good quality water. he believes can make a difference. But he definitely is convinced that your attitude makes a difference. Actually, there is a little bit of reference from Sean and Steve, who are the chapter called, I think it's called Conversation with Two Medicine Shamans. And they're quite remarkable guys that have been leading entheogenic sacramental plant ceremonies for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years. They're really experienced, really wise, I would say. I know them quite well. I coordinate iboga ceremonies for them out here on the West Coast. They come from England every year to do that. And so I spend a lot of time with them when they're here, and I sit in the ceremonies with them, and I assist at them, and I cook for them and all that sort of thing. And I watch the way they use cannabis, and they're really masterful with it. Steve says in the interview, he says that it's like looking through a window into a space that you couldn't see before. He didn't say that part of it. He just says looking through a window. And he said it just opens a whole bunch of things up when they're working in ceremony. But regarding what we were just saying about growing, he said they both feel that ideally they're only going to smoke material that they either knew the grower directly or they get it from somebody that secondhand, he or she got it from a grower that they trust, had that sacred attitude, and they trust that person. And they claim that they can tell right away the state of mind of the person who grew the plant.
Wow.
Yeah, I bet that's true.
Yeah. So I think that's a really exciting area as we move into a legal framework in many countries, of course, and it's already happening. I kind of wish that I'd had greater access to more people who have already been doing that, because I'm sure they're out there. I just didn't meet them particularly, and I did hear about meet this fellow or hear about him. I never did meet him face to face. It was through email, but I'm sure there are people who do understand that really well, that issue of how you relate with the plants and the effect that it has. The same guy as LLP says that when he introduces his plants or shares them with friends, they can tell right away. It's a very different kind of experience than a lot of the stuff that they're used to smoking. Much more sublime, much sweeter.
Does the country he's in start with a C?
No.
Okay.
This is 20 questions. No, it doesn't. He's in the British Isles. He's in the Great Britain, but I don't even know where. He didn't even tell me where he lives.
Our guest is going to be Rick Simpson.
Yes. No, I know who Rick Simpson is. I've never met him, but I do know that he's kind of the pioneer for the Phoenix Tears thing. Yeah.
Also a fellow Canadian.
Yes, I know that he's from Canada. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
What in your research of putting the book together, what other than obviously Jamaica is kind of the go-to when people think of religions, more closely tied with the plant, did you find any other? Obviously there's probably a few in India, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Rastafarian tradition in Jamaica is quite recent, relatively speaking. If I'm not mistaken, there's a chapter in there in the book by Jeff Brown, who was a member of a Rasta church called the Ethiopian Zion Coptic Church in Jamaica. And they were somewhat different from some of the other Rasta churches. But basically, it seems like it didn't really take hold in Jamaica until the 1800s, I think. So it's relatively recent. In fact, the Rastafarianism itself didn't start until, I think, 1930, started by a fellow named Marcus Garvey. Whereas India... Oh, and by the way, if we have time, we might want to come back to a question you asked me right at the beginning, which I never really got to, which was what was sort of the genesis of this project. We got off in different directions, and I never really answered that question. But as far as this question goes, well, one of the chapters in the book is called Venerable Traditions by Chris Bennett, who's well known in the circles who know about these things, historian of cannabis in ritual, religion, and magic. And he's really done his homework and knows a lot about this, and does a kind of a cursory survey of cannabis's historical use, particularly in the Middle East and Asia. He doesn't really go into Africa, where there's actually a long tradition as well. But it goes way back. And they have found cannabis residue, seeds, things like that in the grave sites of shamans from the Neolithic era, we're talking 7,500 years ago. So it's old, and that's just what we know. The lineage that cannabis comes from is estimated to be somewhere between 30 and 90 million years old on this planet. So basically, it was around before humans ever showed up, or pretty much from the beginning. And it's, as I was saying earlier, that there have been many cultures on this planet that know the plants in their environment extremely well. And so it seems kind of a no-brainer to hypothesize that anywhere humans lived, they would have known what the plants in their region were capable of. So it almost seems certain, even though there isn't archaeological evidence, that cannabis would have been used for a variety of purposes from the dawn of humanity. We do know that it goes back about 10,000 years in China. There's not a lot of record of its spiritual use at that time. There is as you get closer to the Christian era. India, we know that it goes back at least pre-Christian, at least to 500 or 1000 BC, or they now call it BCE, before the Christian era. So there's perhaps a 2,000 year, 2 to 3,000 year relatively well-known history of spiritual use of cannabis in India. The sadhus, certain traditions of the sadhus, certain lineages of the sadhus are still using cannabis. The god Shiva is considered the lord of bhang. And actually, there's a great chapter in the book by Satyan Raja, who led a group, or has led groups on sacred pilgrimages to various places. And he took a group of people to what's known as the Kumbh Mela in India, which is, it happens in 4 different places. And in each of those places, it happens once every 4 years, I think. And it's the largest human gathering anywhere. In total, the one that he went to in 2013, it was estimated to have had between 100 and 150 million people attended. They just spread out, and they camp, and they stay there for a month or 6 weeks or whatever. And he was introduced into the inner circles of sadhu use. And these people claim that they are the original progenitors of Hinduism from a couple thousand years ago or more. And they've had this continual lineage of ganja use ever since, So yes, there is a widespread and ancient history on this planet. This book I've been reading recently, called Sacred Bliss by Mark Ferreira, is another book on the history. And he just read last night that cannabis took hold in Ethiopia in the early Christian era, and from there, I think, if I got it correct, spread throughout Africa. So it was fairly early on in the Christian era that cannabis spread throughout Africa and has been used for a wide variety of purposes, including healing and shamanism and that sort of thing since. So, yes, it's been around. It's been in the Americas for at least since the Europeans came, because they brought it with them. And in fact, that Neolithic find that I mentioned of the seeds in the grave site was in the Ukraine. So this plant has been with us a long time. I think we are very intimately intertwined with this plant.
How old was that Neolithic find again?
1,500 years ago. So 5,500 BCE.
Wow.
And that's, as I say, that's just what we know from archaeological findings. There's no reason to think it just started right then, you know. And again, why wouldn't people have found out about it? I mean, they certainly found out about all its other uses fairly early on. The Chinese, as I said, were using it for, you know, everything: paper, clothing, rope, medicines of all kinds, et cetera, et cetera. So it stands to reason that it would be almost impossible to miss. I mean, if you were using it as a medicine, you'd be going, I feel different.
Or if you walk by it in the bush and smelt it, you'd be like, wow, what's that?
Yeah, I think I'll try some of that, see what happens. Yeah.
Well, now's as good a time as ever to circle back around to the Genesis story, I suppose.
Right. So, yes, I've been involved with entheogenic substances for quite a long time. I also co-organized this conference in Vancouver in its 6th year now, called the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, where our mission is to address issues related to how to use entheogens spiritually, basically, and for healing purposes. So I've been involved in that for 6 years or so. And my main kind of area of focus has been getting presenters for the conference, finding them and working with them and so on. And this Kathleen Harrison that I mentioned earlier, who wrote chapter 1 in the Cannabis and Spirituality book, came in 2012. And I hung out with her somewhat. And actually, we spent the whole day together on the day after the conference. She wanted to see what was going on in the mushrooms. She's a mushroom person as well, growing in Vancouver at that time. End of October is prime mushroom season for many varieties, actually. So we hung out all day. And at that point, I'd been thinking that, you know, while cannabis is spreading so rapidly around the planet, gaining legal recognition, gaining a lot of recognition for its medicinal benefits, and so on and so on, this one area wasn't really being talked about or practiced to any great extent, particularly in the West. You know, as we've said, there's traditions from other parts of the world that are still extant, but very few people were really thinking about cannabis as a spiritual medicine. And I felt that needed to be readdressed or redressed. So I mentioned this to Kathleen while we were going around that day, that I'd been thinking about doing something with it, but I wasn't quite sure what, because I didn't think I had a whole book in me, just for me to write a whole book on that. I just didn't know enough about it. Because my intention always was not to make it a historical document, not to make it an academic document. I wanted it to be a hands-on, kind of practical, usable source for people going forward, you know, eyes on the future, so to speak, eyes on the present and future. And so I mentioned this to Kathleen, and she said, well, I said, I didn't know, quite where I was going to go with that. And she said, well, I think that would be a really important book. And if you write it, I'll contribute to it. Well, I love Kathleen Harrison. She's an amazing human being, and she's a beautiful writer, although she's never written a book. She's written several essays in other people's books, and I've always loved her writing. And so when she said that, a light went off in my head, and I thought, okay, let's do it. And then from there, I just managed to find 17 altogether contributors to write on various aspects of the book, and that unfolded over a 3 to 4 year period and led to now.
Was there anything that you learned during this process that you didn't sort of know before or didn't think of?
I've forgotten. Well, I'm not 100% sure, except as I mentioned a while back there, it's been an ongoing shifting process. I've become more disciplined about it, about my use of the plant, although I've always, for a long, long time, tended to prefer a more contemplative way of doing it. But say, 15 years ago, I would more likely to be as my friends have gotten older, they've lost interest in it, most of them. The ones that we used to hang out with for Christmas dinner parties, for example, they didn't really want to smoke, in those kind of situations anymore. But, that's the kind of situation where we'd have a couple of glasses of wine, and then after dinner, the joint would pass around, that kind of thing. I don't really do that now, or rarely. And at that time, my favorite thing to do with cannabis generally was to put some headphones on and listen to some great music. And that's changed over the years. And oftentimes I'll be sitting in these little sort of, solo ceremonies that I mentioned earlier, and I'll be thinking, this is a beautiful space. I really like the space I'm in right now. It'd be great to have some music, and then I kind of think, you know what? I don't really need to put anything else in my brain, in my mind. I can just be present here, And so oftentimes I would just let it go. I wouldn't put any music on, and just sit with it.
But sometimes you've got to listen to Pink Floyd's Uma Guma. Sometimes it's just got to be done again.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm not saying I don't. I definitely still do do that. And,
but I hear you. The sound of silence is becoming more and more appealing in today's world of too many devices.
Absolutely. And hopefully that will be understood more and more deeply. And it does get mentioned a lot in the book. I particularly keep talking about that. As I mentioned earlier, it's a challenge for me. It's, maybe I'm even biased toward silence because of that, that it's a challenge. But on the other hand, I just keep coming across that notion everywhere in the teachings, in the Buddhist teachings and Native American teachings. It's like reality happens when you get out of your head. Right? The world unfolds, the divine unfolds when we step out of our little cell, so to speak. Even if we can do that for a few minutes, remarkable things can happen, particularly, again, with the amplifying assistance of the plant that way. It can deepen those moments. In the book, I mentioned that it can sometimes be more challenging to meditate with cannabis than without it because of this stimulating property, that's the great ideas thing that one of you mentioned earlier in the 15-minute, opening air part.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't. It's hard to meditate on.
It is. But also, even if the gap isn't all that long, or it can seem like it's not that long, that can be very beneficial just to step into that gap, even for a short period of time.
Definitely.
Actually, I tend to want to push the monkey along, so to speak. So I think in the book I say that it can often be beneficial to do the meditating in the early part of it because that's when it's sharpest and potentially then the deepest. But that's also when it's the most challenging. Dee Dussault, who has a chapter in the book called Ganja Yoga, and is actually getting very well known for that work now. In fact, she's got a book coming out with Harper One in the spring on Ganja Yoga. Cool. She leads Ganja Yoga ceremonies down in the San Francisco Bay Area. And she mentions in her chapter that it might be better to do your meditation later once the edge has softened, So, it's just a matter of experimenting. I think personally it's worth challenging the challenge, as it were, of doing your meditating early in the session when things are really sharp. I think there's a potential for going deeper. Now, all this has been premised on the idea of taking it through inhalation, either smoking or vaporizing. As you guys know, I'm sure, when you take it orally, it's a whole different scenario. It can take up to 2 hours to peak and last for several more hours. And it can go a lot deeper as well. Almost everybody who's done much oral ingestion of cannabis has some sort of horror story about doing too much, But again, that comes to how you channel that energy, right? So that's actually kind of
a setting, right?
Setting and experience and courage and willingness to surrender. All those things come into play just in the same way as they do with the other entheogens. That's what they say about ayahuasca. You're not really going to get anything from ayahuasca unless you totally surrender to it. In the Native American church where they use peyote, they talk about, they say, watch out for head traffic. I like that little phrase, head traffic. It's an easy thing to remember. Watch out for head traffic, and basically the same. Just so-called straight meditation. Is you're wanting to open up a gap in the continual stream of discursive thinking mind that is the ego's primary strategy for creating a wall or a veil between oneself and unconditioned reality. So yes, silence, inner silence, even if you're moving. The reason the great traditions like Buddhism teach a simple sit down, shut up, and pay attention meditation is because the less external distraction there is, the greater the chance of experiencing that gap in a simple, pure, kind of clear, clean way. But if you can go for a walk in the woods alone or with somebody that you don't feel you have to get chatting with, and just, again, shut up, so to speak, and pay attention, that same inner silence can infuse, your being in that kind of circumstance. And again, yoga, as we've been talking about, and maybe even hockey.
And podcasting.
Brain chemistry is so interesting. You got to wonder, if the cannabinoid, the inner cannabinoid system is functioning in a certain particular way with some of these, remarkable athletes. You guys are aware that for a lot of people, cannabis seems to stretch out time, slow things down. Yeah. So I've read descriptions by people like Mario Lemieux, where he says that when he's got the puck, I don't know if that happened to him all the time, but I think it happened to him a lot. He said everything slows down. Everything starts to go in slow motion. And he has plenty of time to see what's going on and what he needs to do, Whereas to the observer, it's all happening at lightning speed. And if it were me, because I was a lousy hockey player as a kid, it was even too fast to cope with, basically. But it's almost as if there's something going on with the brains of people like that, that they're, sort of highly cannabinized somehow, in the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, they can maybe adrenaline switches on something that, a certain strain of marijuana is turning on in someone else.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been said or speculated that the endocannabinoid receptor system is the most prominent receptor system in our bodies. There are a lot of ways in which, we even without an exocannabinoid, namely cannabis, and actually other plants have cannabinoids too, apparently. But even without taking in any cannabis, we have this cannabinoid system, which is extensive in the brain and the nervous system and so on in the organs. And some people have written about how different people have different levels of cannabinoid action in their bodies, just naturally. And that there's some interesting studies on how that affects the way those people function.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to see if they were creative, more creative types, or good at sports, or like what sort of attributes they have.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about where this is all going, and it's not just about cannabis. It's not, there's no dogma here. It's not like, oh, goody, my thing is sort of, taking off like a rocket. I think our whole understanding of brain chemistry, mind altogether, and our relationships to plants, our relationship as a species to plants and planet, but plants in particular, is expanding very, very quickly in certain circles these days. And I think we're going to see a lot of exciting work. Lots of people are reading all these really interesting books now. I'm reading a book called The Hidden Life of Trees, and it's written by this German forester who's lived in the forest and managed forests his whole life for 40 years or so. And the stuff that's in there about what trees are capable of doing is just astonishing sometimes, Like you could take, he worked with the tree called the beech, beech trees. a lot. And he said, there would be forests of beach where different parts of the forest were in different kinds of terrain, some of which was very fertile and moist and got a lot of sunlight, and others were rocky and hard and didn't get a lot of water and so on. So some of it would grow way faster than other parts. And what happens over time in a beech forest is that the strong ones, the ones that are growing fast, share their nutrients through an underground network. That's actually, mushrooms come into this because the mycelial network helps transport those nutrients when the tree's roots don't go far enough to connect to another tree. But they'll actually be conscious of what's going on way the hell over in this other part of the forest, and they'll share their nutrients with the weaker trees, so that over time what happens is all the beech trees in that forest grow at the same rate. Now, that's an astonishing level of intelligence, and it's in every aspect of nature. So I think that's that area that I'm just kind of, roughly dancing around there is a super exciting kind of edge of human understanding. And you might even say essential, because if we don't get our relationship to the planet straight, relatively quickly, we're fucked anyway.
Yeah. I was going to say there must be an overall excitement in the community as well for the legalization that's happening in the South. Like now, there hasn't been a lot of attention paid to it since the last election, but there's definitely way more states. I mean, it's happening pretty quick. It's becoming fairly accepted.
It's on the ballot, at least.
Yeah, it's kind of a snowball that's accumulating, and it's going to be very hard for it to be stopped. Unfortunately, the feds are the laggards in the states at this point, but Americans have this wonderful rebellious quality, and their structure has been set up to have strong states' rights. So states have these ways of creating laws that can be overridden by the feds, but they often get away with it too, hence Colorado, Washington, California, Alaska, and so on. Canada, I'm really excited about what's going on in Canada. I just sure hope they don't, kind of get overcautious with all this. The task force that just tabled their report several weeks ago was very impressive, surprisingly so. I heard interviews with some of the major players in the field that have been advocating for cannabis for a long time, people like Dana Larson and the lawyer Kirk Tusaw, even Mark Emery, the bad boy, who never really has a kind thing to say about any kind of authority, was saying, like, the head of this task force is Anne McClellan, and he said, "I never thought I'd agree with Anne McClellan." So if there's a very serious bunch of people, this task force, they're heavy hitters. They're not a bunch of flakes or anything. And I'm really hoping the government takes them seriously, because if they follow through on their recommendations, they're pretty good. They're going to encourage smaller players at every level, from the growing to the distribution to the retailing. They're going to, they're saying they're going to allow people to grow their own, which to me is a wonderful way to help keep costs down for people, and also to help keep it in an environment where corporations aren't going to be able to take control of it and squeeze it into sort of monolithic, power-hungry Coca-Cola, Nestle kind of scenario. They're looking at the dispensary model as a good way to distribute, like that your question way back at the beginning about pharma. Are we going to have a pharmaceutical or pharmacy-based kind of system where people know what they're doing? I think there's reason to be hopeful, and I just hope the government doesn't chicken out on doing this in face of, opposition or sinking poll numbers or idiots from Trump's cabinet threatening them or something.
Hopefully that aspect of being able to grow it yourself can open up the way, because that's what I'm hoping to see, is it go more the way of the wine market and the artisan market. So it's not just 3 different companies that are making all the pot in Canada, and they've got a couple different strains or ways to go, but that's about it. I'm hoping it's like Ma and Pa all over the place, and if if myself or, me and a group of friends decide we want to take a crack of it, we can go through some loopholes that aren't retarded, be able to go through some easy things that don't cost you too much money and just try your craft at a little grow shop or something.
Well, if you want to make like something now, from what I understand in Canada, if you want to make something, whatever, or you pick clovers on the side of the road and you dry them and sell them as a tea and you say this is clover to make tea with or something. If you say it in a certain way that they have tons of triggers, then you have to either pull it or you have to pay like $1 million to get it regulated so that you can sell it for each of your products. Like it's a lot of money. So weed has got to be that way. Like if they make it to where everyone can grow, like you're saying, it becomes like a wine market, then I don't know. It's going to be interesting to watch. We've come a long way.
Yes. Well, they are saying, just to be clear, growing it for yourself. They're not saying that, just anyone's going to be able to grow it.
Yeah, I understand that totally.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there'll be some fairly rigorous legislation in place for anyone who's planning on selling it. And I'm not opposed to that particularly, although ironically, in Vancouver, pretty much everything's working fine the way it is. If they just left us alone the way they're leaving us alone now, we'd probably be fine, But there is, like the Globe and Mail did this study a couple of months ago where they tested, I forget whether 13 or 17 different samples from, different, retail outlets. And they found unacceptable levels of mold and other contaminants in a number of them. They found that the claimed percentage of THC was bullshit in a number of them. So I don't really have a problem with inspection and making sure that people what they claim is true and that the product is healthy. I mean, I'd like to see. We have organic certification, federal or provincial, I'm not sure which, for produce, right? You can buy organic apples and organic red peppers and so on. So why not for cannabis? I'd like to be able to go into my shop and know that this has been inspected and it's been grown organically.
I think the main reason there is because it just can't keep up right now. They have too much of a demand, and so they're allowed to get by with cutting corners. Because I agree with you. I mean, I've only had my card for a little while, and I was, I don't know, probably like everybody, you're a little maybe excited at first. I was kind of leery, but it's not as, it's not being cured properly, and there's certainly no love to it, like you were saying. I mean, there's some, I shouldn't say that. There's some, but it's more of and I think mine's coming out of the Hershey plant, like you were talking about, So that's probably part of it, but that's how I've always been. You start at the bottom and then you work your way up, I guess. But it's not that they're the bottom; it's a great company.
I think having a legal regime is going to be good for Canada, and it's going to be an example for the world if it's done right too. Even if it's got weaknesses, it's still going to be an example. It's going to push the whole thing along with other countries too. I think.
Then it'll get better. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it'll continue to get better. Yeah, that's right. I mean, Justin Trudeau is coming from a harm reduction point of view, which is sort of like mom and apple pie. You can't argue with his two main points, which is we want to protect our children and keep the sale, etc., growing and sale out of the hands of criminals. So who can argue with that? But it's a very limited perspective too, because it's a harm reduction perspective. It's not a potential benefits perspective, right? And I don't blame him for it. That's where we're starting. But I would hope that within 5 or 10 years, and I hope in some humble way or small way that this book would contribute a little bit to that too. The understanding will have spread more widely into the culture that it's already there for medicinal use, but we're just kind of contributing to the hopeful understanding that the plant has spiritual benefits as well, and it's not we're not just legalizing it to, from a harm reduction point of view. We're legalizing it because it should be legal. It should be accessible to people. I've called it the people's plant. I actually borrowed that phrase from another wonderful writer in the book, very philosophical kind of guy, named Jeremy Wolfe, called Thoughts on Pot, Part 2. Thoughts spelled THOTS. And he calls cannabis the people's psychedelic, a term I quite like. And I kind of borrowed that term and started using the phrase the people's plant. It's always been with us. It always will be, despite whatever restrictions people try to put on it. It's our human right to have access to this plant.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking for an hour and a half. What do you think? Does this sound like a good place to pack it in, or do you have any more burning questions?
No, I think that about wraps it up. That's a good place to end. Did you have anything you wanted to get out before we wrap it up? Do you have a website or anything like that where our listeners can track you down, or any more of your work they can check out? Can you get the book through your site instead of Amazon to...
I'm not selling it directly from the site. No, okay. I've got a buy button on there for going to the publisher, going to Amazon, or going to Barnes and Noble. If anyone can order it from Banyan Books here in Vancouver, or any small bookstore, really, independent bookstore, I would encourage that, because it's, as many people know, really difficult to keep a bookstore alive these days. And Banyan here in Vancouver is a fantastic bookstore. It's the sort of mind, body, spirit store.
Yeah, it's great. I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well.
That'd be great. And the owner of Banyan has been a supporter of the entheogens from the get-go. He's been involved since it started in 1970 something, and he's always had a section on the psychedelics or entheogens. Always been very supportive of them, and I'd love to see his bookstore continue and be supported, and just bookstores in general, that way.
If you do get it on Amazon, leave a review.
Yes, please do. Yeah, and if anyone's within striking distance of Vancouver, I'd love to see you at our book launch celebration that we're having on Friday, January 27th. We've rented a sizable hall. We've hired a DJ. Some of the other contributors are going to be there to say a few words. I'll mumble a few things for 5 minutes or so. Hopefully, sign some copies of the book, and we're calling it a cannabis-friendly event. And we're saying BYOC. I could have said BYOB because that works too, but
or BYOP or BY.
Well, BYOB is a nice play on the other version of BYOB, except that some people would get confused and bring the wrong substance. When
is that?
Friday, January 27th in the evening, 7:30. Our ambition or our vision for this, when I say our, it's the co-organizer from the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, Selena Archambault, and I are working on this together. And our vision for it is that it be a kind of almost like a ceremony, like that we're marking and honoring the renaissance or return of cannabis as a spiritual medicine. So we're hoping that we can get a lot of people high and get them dancing. And just getting into the zone, as it were, the flow, as one of you guys said earlier. Yeah,
that's a great idea.
Yeah. So anyone that can come to Vancouver for that, please do. Yes, my website is cannabisandspirituality.com. Easy to remember. And I have a Facebook group that I'd love people to participate in, subscribe to the blog, offer comments, submit posts. I'm happy to approve posts if anyone has anything intelligent to say about anything related to cannabis as a spiritual medicine, and even not strictly spiritual, but medicinal benefits and other things. I'm happy to post those as well. I have a Twitter feed, but I'm really lazy with that. I hardly ever do anything on it.
Right on. Well, thanks a lot, Stephen.
Well, thank you, guys.
Yeah,
it was wonderful to meet you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being good listeners and letting me rant and ramble at length.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, anytime.
And thanks for the book.
Sure. Well, if you meet anytime, we can continue this. I always forget at least 50% of what could have been said usefully, you know. So if you want to do it again sometime, just let me know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Next time we'll do it in person. If you're ever coming through Calgary, let us know too.
Yeah, usually I go over Calgary, not through it.
The Igloo is a safe space.
My wife used to do I've forgotten the name of it, the art market or something. It was, I think, the largest Christmas art show in Calgary.
Spruce Meadows.
What's that?
Spruce Meadows?
No, it was held downtown at the convention center.
Oh.
I forget what it was called, art market or something like that. We did that. I go and help her out. She stopped doing it 3 or 4 years ago, but I several times went to Calgary at a nasty time of year in November, when everything was bleak looking and the wind howled down the corridors of the skyscrapers, and people were walking through covered walkways between streets, you know.
Plus 15s.
What's that?
The plus 15s.
What's that?
That's what they call those walkways that go over the streets. Yeah, those are awesome.
Yeah, they are kind of cool. But, you know, the problem is that you need them.
That is the problem.
Whereas Vancouver, all you need is a raincoat.
And an umbrella, yeah.
Yeah. And whereas, although this year we're having a ridiculously cold winter for here, you know, not enough to get sympathy from anywhere else in Canada, but unusual for here, where we've had snow on the ground in my backyard now for 5 weeks, and I've never seen that in the 40 years or so I've lived here.
Global warming's a bitch.
Yeah, it's nonsense.
97% of scientists agree global warming is true.
Well,
says the guy from Time magazine, I guess, right?
I like to think of it as global weirding or global wild. You know, it's like everything's getting crazier and more extreme climate-wise, and I think we've hardly begun to see that one yet. Yeah, that's a whole other issue. But it's I referred to it very briefly earlier on, regarding that there needs to be a consciousness transformation on this planet that affects a lot of people. And starts to change the way that we do business, so to speak, or we're in for a really, really difficult time. We might be anyway, but everyone needs to be doing their best to help wake themselves up and wake other people up and contribute creative ideas to improving humanity and our relationship to the planet. And so, our relationship to plants is a huge central part of that.
Cannabis and trees.
And I think a lot of people need to be balanced. A lot of people don't understand. I've tried to explain it a couple times, but the awareness, the waking up and the awareness is important, but also the equanimity is important.
That's the same.
And that's what's missing in a lot of things, I think. You know, that's where people get out of control in like Twitter fights or whatever. And there's just, yeah, it's not PC and it's not civility. It's more like just having a balanced mind.
Slow down, pay attention, relax, open your heart. It's really difficult to do on some level, but it's a simple concept. Well said. And I like your word balance there too, actually. There's a writer or an academic, I guess, named Robert Melamede. And he's referred to cannabis as, he has an article online called something like cannabis or endocannabinoid system or something like that, regulator of cells, homeostatic regulator of cells and society.
Mm-hmm.
Joan Bellow talks about that a little bit in her chapter, that what cannabis does is it balances the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system in the autonomic, the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. It creates a balance point. It doesn't create, the way she talks about it is that most people are swinging between stress on one end or fatigue on the other end. And sort of, haunted by that kind of imbalance, but that cannabis can balance you without swinging you into either extreme. So there's a whole field of discussion on that issue as well. So yes, I see cannabis use as central to this change that we're talking about potentially.
Well, I definitely can't wait to talk to you again.
All right, gentlemen.
Okay.
Nice to meet you, and anytime, just keep in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Bye for now.
Take care.
Okay, good night.
Bye-bye.